Number 1.
How does that old saying go? 3 can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. It's a saying attributed to Benjamin Franklin. Though if he met the people of the town of Skidmore, then maybe $100 Ben would reconsider that saying. Why? Well, it has to do with the death of a town bully, a town that saw who did it, and no one saying anything to anyone for decades. This cold case is cold because no one will ever talk. Ken Rex McElroy was a bully, to put it mildly. For decades, the man held the town of Skidmore virtually hostage. He did whatever he wanted, often in front of witness, and through a combination of great legal representation and intimidation, McElroy was only convicted once. That led to his death. When Ken Rex McElroy died in 1981, the town of Skidmore had about 440 people. Just about all of them, and were scared of McElroy. Over the course of decades, McElroy had gotten himself a reputation in the town. He stole livestock, committed arson, and had a liking for underage girls, who he would marry in order to get their silence. The stories about McElroy are all disturbing to hear. When he met his last wife, Trina McLeod, she was 12. By 14, McLeod was pregnant, dropped out of school, and went to live with McElroy and his third wife, Alice. In order to escape charges of statutory rape, McElroy divorced Alice and married Trina. When Trina tried to flee with her baby, McElroy burned her parents' home down and shot the family dog after bringing Trina back. When he was indicted for the arson and Trina and her child sent to a foster family, McElroy threatened the family and would sit outside their house. It was something of a pattern with McElroy. In order to get off his charges, he intimated any and all witnesses, usually sitting outside of their homes all hours of the day. The stalking and harassment would unnerve the witnesses so much that many would back out. Despite all of this though, it caught up to McElroy later rather than sooner. See, something amazing happened in 1981. McElroy was convicted of a crime. And that's where things go, the route of the vigilante. In 1980, one McElroy's daughters allegedly tried to steal some candy from the store belonging to Ernest Bowenkamp and his wife, Lois. McElroy was furious at this and returned to the store to threaten Bowenkamp with a shotgun. During the confrontation, McElroy shot Bowenkamp in the neck. Somehow, the 70-year-old survived the attack. McElroy was arrested for attempted murder. The young prosecutor of the case, David Baird, however, had a different idea to handle McElroy. While McElroy escaped charges due to his intimidation tactics, the other part was due to his lawyer. Baird didn't think he could get a conviction for attempted murder, but he knew he could get one for an assault charge. So that's what he did. And it worked. McElroy was convicted. He was, however, released pending on appeal. Later that night, McElroy was at the local D&G tavern, where he was overheard making graphic threats toward Bowenkamp. Threats he would never follow through on. See, at the same time, there was a town meeting. Namely, what to do about McElroy. The sheriff at the time suggested a neighborhood watch program and that no confront McElroy directly one-on-one. So the group, hearing about McElroy's threats over at the D&G tavern, went to confront him as a group. What happened next thrust the small town of Skidmore into the spotlight. McElroy and Trina were in his truck, preparing to leave the D&G tavern, and the crowd of furious onlookers when someone's fired upon the truck. Trina survived, but McElroy was not so lucky. He was fatally shot twice by 2 different guns, and the crowd of an estimated 46 witnesses saw nothing. No one saw a thing. No one called an ambulance. No one even turned off the truck. At the end of it, McElroy was dead. While Trina claimed to have seen the shooter, could even identify him. No one corroborated her story. All of those people either couldn't identify the assailant or said that they didn't see the incident. Local prosecutors denied to press charges, not that there was person to press charges against. Even with a federal investigation, nothing came of it. The town of Skidmore had closed ranks, and no one was talking. In the aftermath, Trina sued the town for $6 million along with one of the men she swears was one of the shooters. She settled out of court for $17,600, and no one admitted wrongdoing. Trina would leave Skidmore, remarry, and pass away at the age of 55 in 2012. That's probably what's caught our attention on the case. It seized international attention from the onslaught, and the story spread like wildfire, viral in a way that we only really see today. There have been books on the case, an episode of 60 Minutes, internet sleuths, and, more recently, a docuseries called No One Saw a Thing all profiled the case. And through it all, Skidmore has remained quiet. It looks like they will always remain quiet.
Number 2.
Marilyn Sheppard was brutally murdered while her husband, Dr. Sam Sheppard, slept downstairs. Dr. Sheppard was sentenced to life in prison for the murder. He was eventually freed from prison, but the scars of the injustices he had to endure were permanent. Attorney F. Lee Bailey fought for Sheppard's freedom and won. Sam Sheppard was voted the man most likely to succeed by his senior high school class. He was athletic, smart, good-looking, and came from a good family. Marilyn Sheppard was attractive, with hazel eyes and long brown hair. The two began dating while in high school and eventually married after Sam graduated from the Los Angeles Osteopathic School of Physicians in September 1945. After he had graduated from medical school, Sam continued his studies and received his Doctor of Osteopathy degree. He went to work at the Los Angeles County Hospital. His father, Dr. Richard Sheppard, and his two older brothers Richard and Stephen, also doctors, were running a family hospital and convinced Sam to return to Ohio in the summer of 1951 to work in the family practice. By this point, the young couple had a 4-year-old son, Samuel Reese Sheppard, Chip, and with a loan from Sam's father, they purchased their first home. The home sat on a high cliff overlooking Lake Erie shore in Bay Village, a semi-elite suburb of Cleveland. Marilyn settled into the life of being married to a physician. She was a mother, homemaker, and taught Bible classes at their Methodist church. The couple, both sports enthusiasts, spent their leisure time playing golf, water skiing, and having friends over for parties. To most, Sam and Marilyn's marriage seemed free of problems, but in truth, the marriage was suffering due to Sam's infidelities. Marilyn knew about Sam's affair with a former Bayview nurse named Susan Hayes. According to Sam Sheppard, although the couple experienced problems, divorce was never discussed as they worked to revitalize their marriage. Then tragedy struck. On the night of July 4, 1954, Marilyn, who was 4 months pregnant, and Sam entertained neighbors until midnight. After the neighbors left, Sam fell asleep on the couch and Marilyn went to bed. According to Sam Sheppard, he was awakened by what he thought was his wife calling his name. He ran to their bedroom and saw someone who he described later as a bushy-haired man fighting with his wife, but was immediately struck on the head, rendering him unconscious. When Sheppard awoke, he checked the pulse of his blood-covered wife and determined she was dead. He then went to check on his son and found him unharmed. Hearing noises coming from downstairs, he ran down and discovered the back door open. He ran outside and could see someone moving toward the lake, and as he caught up with him, the two began to fight. Sheppard was struck again and lost consciousness. For months, Sam would describe what happened over and over, but few believed him. Sam Sheppard was arrested for the murder of his wife on July 29, 1954. On December 21, 1954, he was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. A pre-trial media blitz, a biased judge, and police that focused only on one suspect, Sam Sheppard, resulted in a wrongful conviction that would take years to overturn. Soon after the trial, Sam's mother committed suicide on January 7, 1955. Within 2 weeks, Sam's father was dead from a gastric ulcer that hemorrhaged. After the death of Sheppard's lawyer, F. Lee Bailey was hired by the family to take over Sam's appeals. On July 16, 1964, Judge Weinman freed Sheppard after finding 5 violations of Sheppard's constitutional rights during his trial. The judge said the trial was a mockery of justice. While in prison, Sheppard corresponded with Ariane Tebenjahans, a wealthy and beautiful blonde woman from Germany. The two married the day after his release from prison. In May 1965, a federal appeals court voted to reinstate his conviction. On November 1, 1966, a second trial began, but this time with special attention given to ensuring that Sheppard's constitutional rights were protected. After 16 days of testimony, the jury found Sam Sheppard not guilty. Once free, Sam returned to work in medicine, but he also started drinking heavily and using drugs. His life quickly dissolved when he was sued for malpractice after one of his patients died. In 1968, Ariane divorced him and said he had stolen money from her, threatened her physically, and was abusing alcohol and drugs. For a short time, Sheppard got into the world of pro wrestling. He used his neurological background to promote a nerve hold he used in competition. In 1969, he married his wrestling manager's 20-year-old daughter, although records of the marriage have never been located. On April 6, 1970, Sam Sheppard died of liver failure as a result of heavy drinking. At the time of his death, he was an insolvent and broken man. His son, Samuel Reese Sheppard, Chip, has devoted his life to clearing his father's name.
Number 3.
Formerly a military base, the high-security prison Alcatraz sat on a 22-acre island known as the Rock about 1.25 miles away from San Francisco. Because of this, the prison was deemed inescapable. The water surrounding the prison hovers around 48 to 54 degrees all year, along with strong currents. As time went on, the prison would fall into disrepair, and the budget to fix numerous problems was limited. This would become a resounding factor in the inmates, Clarence Anglin, John Anglin, Alan West, and Frank Morris escaping. It was reported that West approached Morris with the plan to escape in early 1960. West knew of a ventilator cover in cell block B that might not have been sealed over with concrete like the majority of the vents. If this was true, it could provide them with a way to get on the roof of the prison from the inside. West also began working with the maintenance crew that provided him insight into the building's structure, layout, and weaknesses. By September 1961, the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, Morris, and West, requested cell moves that made them closer to each other in cell block B, directly under the unsecured vent. All cell moves were approved. The plan to escape was undoubtedly bold and ingenious. Phase 1 involved creating a head start to provide them enough time to tackle the 1.25 miles to San Francisco. They created a diversion by painting dummy heads which were made from a plaster-like mix of soap, concrete, and other materials completed with real human hair. They laid the heads in their beds to fool the guards, and sure enough, on June 12, on the morning following the escape, when the 7 a.m. bell went off to wake the prisoners, guards discovered that the prisoners were still asleep in their beds. It wasn't until one of the guards reached into Morris's cell, pushed the head, and it fell onto the ground that the guards realized that something was wrong. To this day, the dummy head still bores the damage that resulted in this fall. It's unknown who exactly came up with the idea to make dummy heads. However, Clarence worked as a barber and had access to hair trimmings. Either way, phase 1 of the plan was a success. After laying the dummy heads in their beds, the gang moved on to phase 2 of their plans to escape the inescapable prison. The men went to work on busting out of their cells. All 4 of them had 5-inch by 9.5-inch ventilation grates in the back of their cells. Perhaps it came from his time in maintenance. West knew that the wall surrounding the grates was less than 6 inches thick, making it possible for each man to expand the hole in their cell to fit through. For months, the prisoners spent time drilling small close-knit holes around the cover of the ventilation grates, using crude handmade tools like spoons stolen from the kitchen and a drill made from a vacuum cleaner motor. These holes made it possible to remove the entire small section of the wall around the air vents, which they covered with their musical instruments or fake covers made of cardboard. These holes allowed them to access a utility corridor that was directly behind their cells that was typically left unguarded. From there, they were able to climb up to a hidden land area directly above their cell block, where they had been working in secret for several months. In this area, they were able to make the dummy heads, tools, and other items they'd use in their great escape. However, it's worth noting that West never made it to this landing spot during the escape because he was unable to break through the last portion of his wall around his ventilation grate. Consequently, he was left behind. From the landing, The trio was able to climb pipes to the ceiling and reach an air vent that they had previously pried off to ready their escape. Experts say that a sound that was heard around 10:30 p.m. was the sound of the air vent cover being pushed off on the roof. They then climbed down the roof via a pipe to the back of their cell block, climbed the 15-foot fence, and made their way to the north shore of the island. To escape the island, the prisoners had made life preservers and a 14-foot rubber raft, all made from prison-issued raincoats. They gathered over 50 raincoats for the job, possibly stitched them together using sewing machines, and vulcanized the rubber coats by holding the seams up to the heat from the steam pipes. The raft was inflated by using a concertina. Once it was realized that the prisoners were missing, Alcatraz went into lockdown as a search began. Guards quickly found the hidden workshop, the hole in the ceiling, and footprints on the roof and on the ground of the pipe where they climbed down. The FBI joined the case as well as the Coast Guard and the Bureau of Prison Authorities in a wide-scale search, but the escapees, as well as their raft, were never seen again.
Number 4.
On a July morning in 1974, a girl playing with a neighborhood dog along the Race Point Dunes in Provincetown, Massachusetts, stumbled upon a horrifying sight. The nude, disfigured body of a dead woman sprawled out amid the sand and brush. The woman was young and white with pink painted nails and a glittery hairband holding back her auburn-colored ponytail. Beneath her head, which was nearly decapitated by a sickening gash, was a pair of blue jeans. Her hands were missing, and in place of them were piles of pine needles. Investigators could neither identify the woman nor any suspect. She became known as the Lady of the Dunes, and her case has never been solved. But now, new forensic technology could be the key to unraveling this twisted tale. As 12-year-old Leslie Metcalf, her family, and a group of their friends' dogs walked back to the Province Lands Visitor Center after a day of hiking, one of the dogs suddenly became agitated and excited. It shot off and Metcalf followed. Then, she came upon the heart-stopping sight of the Lady of the Dunes. The corpse was found on the sand, face down on a beach towel, about 15 feet from the nearest access road. Her head, the left side of which had been completely crushed, rested on a pair of folded wranglers and a blue bandana. It was altogether appallingly clear that she had been murdered. Investigators estimated that the woman, somewhere between 25 and 35 years old, had been dead for at least 10 days and perhaps as long as 3 weeks. Upon closer examination, investigators determined that the head injury, caused by an object like a military entrenchment tool, had likely killed the young woman. Authorities also found that the victim had been sexually assaulted after death by some kind of wooden block. She had an athletic build, and even though some of her teeth were missing, investigators determined that she had pricey New York-style dental work, which included several golden crowns. Despite these details, the identity of the Lady of the Dunes eluded them, especially because without her hands she had no fingerprints by which to be identified. Investigators consequently began to refer to the victim as the Lady of the Dunes. It was a horrific, brutal murder, said former Provincetown Police Chief Jeff Jaron, who became the town's 4th police chief to investigate the murder. It would be awful for any time, any place. But for the Cape, for Provincetown? Provincetown, after all, was better known for its popularity with artists and flourishing community of LGBTQ+ people, and not for murder. Decades later, strange theories appear to explain the case. Almost 50 years later, the victim known as the Lady of the Dunes is still unidentified. But a number of theories have emerged over the decades. One woman from Maryland contacted local police because she suspected the victim was her sister, who had recently moved to Boston and vanished. But that lead was inconclusive. At one point, investigators suspected that the Lady of the Dunes could be Rory Jean Kessinger, a known drug dealer and bank robber. Physically, Kessinger resembled the victim, and she had escaped from the Plymouth County Correctional Facility in Massachusetts the year before the woman's body was found. But a DNA test from Kessinger's mother did not match the unidentified woman. But one of the oddest theories yet about the Lady of the Dunes cropped up in 2015. The son of Stephen King, author Joe Hill, speculates that she was actually an extra in the 1975 hit film Jaws. Hill noticed that a woman captured in the background of one of the film's scenes matched the victim's description. She also appeared to be wearing a pair of jeans and a blue bandana, two items that were found at the crime scene. It was a wild theory, but not a totally implausible one. Jaws was filmed in Martha's Vineyard, only a few hours away from Provincetown. But Jaws producers had not recorded the names of any extras. Retired Staff Sergeant Warren Tobias, who chased the Lady of the Dunes identity for 20 years, was skeptical of this theory. There were probably hundreds of thousands of women who dressed that way in the 1970s, he said. The identity of the Lady of the Dunes killer has also remained a mystery. In 1987, more than a decade after the Lady of the Dunes was found, a Canadian woman came forward with a bizarre confession. She believed the unidentified woman was someone she had witnessed her father strangle while visiting Provincetown in the 1970s. Canadian authorities passed on the information to the Massachusetts police, but by the time they tried to reach the woman to corroborate her story, she had moved away. Some suspected Irish mob boss James Whitey Bulger could be the killer. Witnesses claimed they saw him with a woman matching the Lady of the Dunes description. Bulger had even removed the teeth of one of his female victims in the past, yet he was never a formal suspect. In 2000, imprisoned murderer Haddon Clark confessed to killing the woman known as the Lady of the Dunes. But Clark's confession was suspect as he lived with paranoid schizophrenia, and investigators determined that he couldn't be trusted. They also found no evidence linking him to the crime. Ultimately, the Lady of the Dunes was buried at St. Peter's Cemetery in October 1974. Her tombstone reads, "Unidentified female body found Race Point Dunes." Twice, her body has been exhumed to obtain DNA evidence, but the examinations have so far revealed nothing. The Lady of the Dunes case gets a fresh look. Today, forensic investigators use high-tech tools to analyze cold cases, and they hope to solve old mysteries like the identity of the Lady of the Dunes this way. The face of the Lady of the Dunes has been reconstructed multiple times. The first reconstruction was a clay model, while other sketches of the mysterious woman's face were made in later years as technology advanced. In 2006, age regression drawings of the woman were made. In 2010, then Police Chief of Provincetown Jaron worked with forensics analysts from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the Smithsonian's National Museum of History to re-examine the case of the Lady of the Dunes. Placing the victim's skull in a CT scanner, the team was able to build a possible image of her face. In 2019, investigators announced that they sought to re-examine the case using new techniques of combining DNA analysis with genealogical family tree building sites. This method was famously used to identify the Golden State Killer in California, decades after his murder sprees. "We're going to examine everything that we can with respect to what's left of the remains," said Cape and Islands District Attorney Michael O'Keefe. New technology could deliver answers. But, for now, the truth behind the life and death of the Lady of the Dunes will remain a mystery.
Number 5.
A stunning sight across the Arizona sky delighted and maybe frightened hundreds, if not thousands of people on March 13, 1997. Shining above the sky were bright lights in a V-shape, maybe a massive ship, that was miles wide, right over Phoenix. Fast forward 24 years, and we still don't know what the Phoenix lights were, but now a lot more people are taking them, and UFOs, seriously. Dr. Lynn Katay watched the Phoenix lights arrive, and she's one of the few people with photographs of them. And for years she stayed quiet, afraid of being branded crazy. Now that the military and the government have actually come forward to say yes, we are studying in the Pentagon, Katay said. In the last year and a half, there have been some massive bombshells in the UFO community. For starters, the US government says they're real, and they were researching them. Look no further than videos from the US Navy that were leaked, and the US military has since confirmed, were real and unidentified. "This is not a joke," Katay exclaimed. "This is real. Something, even though I don't know what they are. I just wanted to know who they are. Who's driving these things?" Nick Pope led the British government's version of the X-Files, and he's investigated UFO sighting for the Ministry of Defense in the early 90s. For years, there was the statement, "These were the people with crazy beliefs, These were conspiracy theorists. Now, it seems that these people, they were the people who were right. It's something the US government claimed for decades it didn't do. The official position of the United States government was, "We have not had a UFO program," he explained. Since the end of 1969, when Project Blue Book was terminated, and nobody is interested in this, I choose my words carefully, but perhaps we were not being told the entire picture. But in reality, a handful of military groups have been investigating UFO sightings since 2007 and may still be doing it today. I think people's perception of UFOs has changed fundamentally, and this whole subject has come out of the fringe and into the mainstream, Pope said. That's what we need, more credible voices coming forward, credible people coming forward, to say this is real, Akcatraz exclaimed. Like the Phoenix Lights, tons of regular people saw them, but most had no special training. But a private pilot also reported them to the FAA that night. The pilot who reported the sighting was actor Kurt Russell. The tail number for that plane was Bonanza 2 Tango Sierra, and I was the pilot, Russell said. He stayed silent for years and only came forward on British TV in 2017. "We're maybe a half mile out, all of a sudden, one of those lights, and I didn't kind of like came out of my reverie and I said, I don't know what they are," I said. He said, "Are we okay here?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm gonna call them," and I reported it. And the sightings have occurred as recently as February, when an American Airlines pilot reported seeing something fly over his plane over New Mexico. American Airlines confirmed the sighting and said the FBI is investigating. "Some people can deal with this topic," Akcatraz said. "Some people don't want it. And that's okay. Everyone in their own time." Because of all this, Akcatraz and other UFO believers say it's time for more people to take it seriously. They say something's up there, and they want to know what it is.
Number 6.
It was March 10, 1928. The weather was amicable. Children were playing outside. Walter asks his mother for money to watch a movie. After being given a penny, Walter immediately rushed to the screening area not too far from his house. It was getting dark, but Walter never came back. Christine was so worried that she hoped her son would appear at the end of the street with his usual smile. But late at night, Walter didn't come back. Feelings of worry mixed with fear of approaching Christine, especially when she went to the houses of Walter's friends one by one, but they did not know where Walter was. The city was actually still shrouded in trauma. About 3 months earlier, there had been a kidnapping of a 12-year-old boy, Marion Parker. The kidnapper who initially demanded the ransom was none other than psychopath William Hickman, nicknamed the Fox. The victim was not only kidnapped, but also killed and mutilated. Although Hickman was arrested, the trauma and fear remained with residents around the place. Back to the case of Walter Collins' disappearance. As soon as Walter's mother contacted the police, they immediately paid great attention to the case. The campaign to find Walter was everywhere. The search was conducted massively. But unfortunately, this search seems to be deadlocked. Walter remains undiscovered. But there is a witness who claims to see a boy like Walter near north of San Francisco. According to his testimony, he saw the boy at a gas station in Glendale. He was sitting in the back seat of a car. But unfortunately, only part of his head could be seen. The bottom of his body was covered in newspapers. The owner of the gas station there then explained the physical characteristics of the rider. He said the man driving the car was foreign-faced, like an Italian, and with him was a woman. Initially, both Christine and the police suspect that Walter Collins was kidnapped by Walter's father's enemies, who were in prison. It could be his motive for revenge. Walter's father happened to have the same name as his son, Walter Collins Sr. The man was actually in prison for armed robbery. The man was curled up in the custody of Folsom State Prison. Walter Collins found? Walter Collins faked. The case of Walter Collins' disappearance received national attention and the Los Angeles Police Department. They have followed up on hundreds of reports and leads, but still to no avail. The police immediately faced negative publicity and increased public pressure to resolve the case immediately. 5 months after Walter's disappearance, a boy appears and claims to be Walter Collins. He was found in DeKalb, Illinois. Christine, who got this news, was delighted. His beloved son was finally found. She even paid $70 to meet the boy and bring him back to Los Angeles. The police then organized a kind of public reunion, hoping that the bad publicity the institution had received would be dashed. Moreover, at that time, the police were indeed being hit by a corruption scandal that tarnished the police department's reputation. But when the two of them were reunited, Christine stated that the child was not her son. Captain J.J. Jones, the officer in charge of the case, then told Christine to take the boy home first for a few weeks. Christine tried to budge, but eventually, she agreed and was forced to take the child home at the same time. 3 weeks later, Christine returned to Captain Jones and insisted that the boy was not Walter Collins. Christine was then lodged in a psychiatric ward at Los Angeles County Hospital under Code 12, a term used to jail or commit someone deemed difficult or inconvenient. Miraculously, the boy managed to convince the police and the psychiatrist that he was Walter Collins. Finally, Captain J.J. Jones specifically investigated this case. He felt that there was something strange about the child. Jones then sent the child to a psychiatrist at the Los Angeles County General Hospital. While there for several days, Jones then tried to get information from the child. Apparently, his guess was correct. That kid was a con man. He admitted to being 12-year-old Arthur Hutchins from Iowa. According to his story, after his mother passed away, he was taken care of by his stepmother, Violet Hutchins. Apparently, his stepmother mistreated him. Arthur was often locked up and tortured. He then decided to run away by using public transportation. Until one day, when he was in Illinois, he stopped at a cafe. According to his description, he heard a boy from Los Angeles who had disappeared at that time. A drifter at a roadside cafe in Illinois said his face looked very similar to Walter Collins. The child's photo was displayed everywhere. Arthur, who saw him, immediately realized a golden opportunity lay before him. Arthur saw this opportunity should not be wasted. He can have a new family and see Hollywood, which had long been his dream. This kid was a fan of the Hollywood actor Tom Mix. After adjusting his appearance to Walter Collins in the photo, he goes to the police station and claims to be the missing Walter Collins. Christine was released 10 days after Hutchins admitted that he was not Walter Collins. The woman then filed a lawsuit against the Los Angeles Police Department. On September 13, 1930, Christine won a lawsuit against Jones and was awarded $10,800 in damages, which Jones unfortunately never paid. What really happened to Walter Collins? Despite years of search efforts, Walter was never found. Only 9 years old, the boy was suspected of being the victim of the serial murder of children known as Wineville Chicken Coop murders. The Wineville Chicken Coop murders case itself was a case that occurred in Riverside County, California, in 1926-1928. The perfect time when Walter disappeared. In this murder case, a man named Gordon Stewart Northcott commits kidnapping of children. After that, he took them to his chicken farm in Northcott's in Wineville, now Mira Loma. There the young victims were abused, tortured, and killed. Gordon committed these heinous acts with the help of his mother. By the time the police raided the chicken farm, they had found many limbs that were no longer intact buried here and there. Walter was thought to have been one of the victims. Christine meets Gordon Northcott. After the first meeting, somehow, she felt sure that her son was still alive. She asked the man if he had killed her son, and upon hearing Gordon's swirling and inconsistent answers, she concluded that the man was crazy. Since Gordon doesn't seem to know if he had met Walter, let alone killed him, Christine clings to the hope that Walter is still alive. Gordon sent Christine a telegram a few days before his execution. He said he had lied in the telegram when he denied that Walter was one of his victims. Gordon promised to tell the truth if Christine came to meet him herself. Just hours before the execution, Christine visited Gordon. But seeing the woman's arrival, Gordon refused. "I don't want to see you," he said when he confronted Christine. "I don't know anything about that. I'm innocent." A news report said that Christine, angered by Gordon's response, was also comforted that Gordon's ambiguous answer gave her hope that Walter was still alive. For years, Christine had refused to believe that her son was the Wineville chicken coop murders victim. For 36 years, Christine never gave up looking for her child until she died on December 8, 1964. Walter has never been found.
Number 7.
To most people, 39-year-old Charles Morgan led a normal and fairly unassuming, some might even say, boring, life. He worked as the president of his own escrow agency at Statewide Escrow in Tucson, Arizona, and he had a seemingly content life with his wife and 4 daughters. There was nothing really that remarkable or ominous about him, and when he left his home on March 22, 1977 to drive 2 of his daughters to school, it was just a mundane chore that no one would have thought anything of. Yet after dropping the 2 girls off, he promptly vanished off of the face of the earth. And so would begin a mystery involving nefarious conspiracies, shady dealings, hitmen, and an unsolved death surrounded by myriad weird clues. When Charles didn't return by evening, his wife Ruth became very worried. It was not like him at all to just go off without saying anything, and she reported him missing. For the next 3 days no sign could be found of Charles, and then something very strange happened. At 2 a.m. in the morning, 3 days after her husband had apparently just disappeared into thin air, Ruth was woken by a banging on the home's back door, and when she went to see who it was, she was surprised to see Charles standing there, apparently in a daze. He was allegedly in quite a state, with 1 shoe missing, 1 plastic handcuff around 1 ankle, and a set around his hands. When she tried to talk to him, he merely gestured towards his throat in a panic, so she sat her husband down with a pen and a pad, and the story would get even weirder still. Charles scrawled out on the paper that he had been kidnapped, tortured, and that his throat had been sprayed with a mysterious hallucinogenic drug that affected the nervous system, and that if he were to try and talk he risked swallowing it and going irrevocably insane or even death. The only way to keep this from happening was to not speak, and when his frantic wife begged him to go to a hospital he flat out refused, saying that they would kill him and the whole family if he did. He also told Ruth to move his car to the back so that these sinister mysterious assailants wouldn't know he had come home. Ruth did as she was told, and for the next few days she took care of Charles, nursing him back to health. During this time the only thing he would say was that he had worked for them for around 3 years and that they had taken away his treasury identification. He also implied that he was working for the federal government as an agent combating organized crime, although details were murky. This was all news to Ruth, and she had no idea what he was talking about. When she asked him for more information, he told her that the less she knew, the better, and that was that. Charles slowly regained his ability to speak, but he refused to talk to his family about what had happened and divulged nothing else about what had happened during the 3 days that he had been missing. At the same time, his personality changed dramatically. He veered off into a realm of extreme paranoia, constantly checking outside and refusing to let his daughters go out alone without him. In addition to this, he grew a thicker beard in order to change his appearance, and he took to wearing a bulletproof vest at all times. After some time had passed, he confided in his wife that he was working as an agent for the United States Treasury Department and that it involved real estate fraud and money laundering being carried out by the mafia, something he had deep knowledge of working in escrow, and in this case he was testifying against 2 major mafia groups, these being the ominous Ned Warren family and the Joe Bonanno family. He told her that, if anything were to happen to him, he would leave a letter behind explaining everything. Shortly after this, Charles Morgan vanished again, after dropping his daughters off at school, and this time he would not be coming back. Ruth and the police looked for the letter he had promised, but it never did turn up, and as the investigation seemed to be going cold, Ruth received a mysterious phone call from an unidentified woman who called herself Green Eyes and simply said, "Chuck is all right." Ecclesiastes 12, 1-8, before hanging up. 2 days later, on June 18, 1977, Chuck would be found again, but this time he was a corpse, shot dead along a remote dirt road in the wastelands about 40 miles away from his home. When police arrived at the scene, they found that he had died from a gunshot to the back of his head, with the bullet going through the skull to lodge in his teeth. He was dressed in his usual wardrobe of a bulletproof vest, and he was also armed with a handgun and hunting knife, as well as various other firearms with ample ammunition in his car. Considering the handgun he had been carrying had been fired, it seemed as if he must have committed suicide, but other strange details would be found as well. One was the gunpowder marks from the shot, which were found on his left hand, even though he had been right-handed. Also odd was that the gun itself had been wiped clean of fingerprints, indeed the whole car had been totally wiped, despite Morgan not wearing gloves. How would he be able to wipe clean the weapon and scene after shooting himself in the head, and why would he shoot himself in the back of the head, anyway? There was also found in the backseat one of Morgan's teeth wrapped in a white handkerchief, as well as a pair of sunglasses that did not belong to him in the front passenger seat. Other strange clues were a map that he had drawn by hand, which led to the spot where he had died, and a $2 bill clipped to the inside of his underwear. On this bill were found some references to Freemasonry, 7 Spanish names: Acevedo, Bejarano, Caero, Duarte, Encinas, Fuente, and Gradillas, and rather spookily the words Ecclesiastes 12:1-8. The bill also had written on the back the names of the signers of the Declaration of Independence numbered 1 through 7, and a map leading to the towns of Robles Junction and Salacity. What did any of this mean? No one knew. Unbelievably, despite all of this, police were eager to embrace the suicide explanation and sweep it all away. Not long after the body was found, other strangeness would orbit the case. The woman calling herself Green Eyes made another call, this time directly to police, and she claimed that shortly before the death she had met with Charles at a local motel. Once there, she said he had shown her a briefcase stuffed with money and claimed that it was to buy out a hit that had been put out on him by the mob. According to her, Charles had driven out into that desert with the money to meet with the hitman and buy him off, but instead the hitman had killed him and taken the money. Ruth would also have her own odd experience when 2 men claiming to be FBI agents came to her house and tore it apart looking for something they don't seem to have been able to find. Even in the face of all of this, authorities would deem it to be a suicide, stating that there was no hard evidence that the mysterious woman's story was true and no evidence of foul play. This was denied vehemently by Morgan's family, who claimed that he had never been suicidal and would not have done that. The case was picked up by investigative journalist Don Devereux, who uncovered a good number of oddities. He says that he uncovered evidence that Morgan had indeed testified in a secret state investigation against the mafia, but when he contacted the FBI for more information, they claimed they did not even know who Morgan was. Devereux would say of this, "When I made a Freedom of Information Act request to the FBI, they had never heard of Mr. Morgan, despite the fact that they obviously opened an investigation, despite the fact the FBI interviewed Mr. Morgan's attorney. They were all over this thing like a blanket for a while. But now they've never heard of the guy. He never existed. No card, no file, no nothing." Quite strange, indeed. Devereux's investigation would turn up other oddities as well, such as a man by the name of Danny Casolaro, who was suspiciously found dead in a motel bathroom from 12 slashes to the wrist after agreeing to share secret information on what Morgan had been up to. The police said it was a suicide. Someone also didn't seem to like the reporter snooping around either, because there was also the matter of a man named Doug Johnston, who happened to work right across the street from Devereux, was found shot dead in his car, which just happened to be the same make and model as his, leading the reporter to suspect that he himself had been the actual target. Coincidence or not? Devereux has not let it deter him from pursuing what really happened to Charles Morgan and has given his thoughts on the case. "I've never seen, in all my years as a journalist, a fellow take himself out in the desert wearing a bulletproof vest and shoot himself in the back of the head. There is a great likelihood that Mr. Morgan was, in fact, doing something with the government. I think this was a guy who was extremely naive about a lot of things. I think somebody blew his cover and he got killed. He was around the edges of a couple of very large organized crime groups in Arizona at that time. It was very easy to get in over your head, and I suspect that over the years, Mr. Morgan was in that kind of situation. He was doing, perhaps, upwards of $1 billion of escrow work in bullion and platinum. These were transactions that only existed on paper. He was a straight businessman that probably got a little too close to the flame. I think the $2 bill provided the basis for some kind of a code. What seemed to be missing, however, was the document that the $2 bill would unlock. If he was quietly providing assistance to the US government and monitoring the activities of one or more major organized crime families, then he wasn't a villain. He was a good guy. And they need to know that. What happened to Charles Morgan? What is the meaning of all of the clues surrounding his death? Who was Green Eyes, and what part did she have to play? Was Morgan killed by sinister forces, and if so, why? Why did the FBI deny any knowledge of this case, and was someone out to get the one who was investigating it all? What was the meaning of the note on that $2 bill? It is all a bafflingly strange case, permeated by dark conspiracies and cover-ups, and we may never know for sure. In the meantime, it is officially listed as a suicide.